The landing bay smelled like rust and death. Jack Morrison walked past the warning signs without reading them, his boots echoing against the metal floor. He'd seen worse places. Desert bases during the war came close, but even those didn't have this particular kind of quiet, the quiet that comes when something living has given up on life. The dragon lay coiled in the center of the bay, its massive body taking up most of the space. Jack had seen pictures of what these creatures looked like when they were healthy. Magnificent didn't even come close. They had scales that caught light like mirrors, eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies, and a presence that made you feel small just by being near them. This one looked like someone had taken all that majesty and crushed it into dust. The scales were cracked and peeling. Some had fallen off entirely, leaving raw patches underneath. The dragon's ribs showed through its sides. You could count them like the bars of a cage. Its eyes, those magnificent eyes that should have glowed with intelligence and power, were dull and half-closed. The beast hadn't moved in hours, according to the medical reports Jack had read. It just lay there, breathing shallow breaths, waiting for nothing in particular. Jack had been retired for 3 years. 3 years of waking up without an alarm, of watching his kids grow up without worrying about deployments, of trying to remember what normal felt like. He worked here now as a maintenance supervisor, boring work, stable work, the kind of work that let him sleep at night without nightmares. He wasn't supposed to care about this dragon. It wasn't his job. It wasn't his problem. But then the Emperor's message had come through. The announcement had been formal and cold, delivered by one of the alien administrators who ran the station. The dragon, once the pride of the entire empire, a creature worth more than entire star systems, had become unmanageable. 12 handlers had already quit. 3 were dead. The beast had attacked, refused food, fought against every attempt to help it. It was broken beyond repair, the announcement said. In 30 cycles, it would be destroyed. Humanely, of course. The Empire was civilized about these things. Jack had been in the cafeteria when he heard it. He was eating lunch alone like he always did, when the words came through the station speakers. And something happened to him then, something he couldn't quite explain. He thought about the look in the dragon's eyes from the files he'd glanced at. Not anger. Not even pain exactly. Just done. The kind of done that comes after you've fought and nothing has changed. He'd seen that look before. It had been there in his sergeant's eyes, the night before Jenkins threw himself out of an airlock. It had been there in the faces of soldiers who'd lost too much and couldn't find a reason to keep going. Jack had always been the one who pulled people back from that edge. It was his thing. He could talk to broken people. He could sit with them in the dark and make them believe that things might get better. He'd done it in the military. He'd done it as a single parent when his daughter asked if mommy was coming back and he had to find the right words to say no. Without thinking about it too much. Because if he thought about it, he'd talk himself out of it. Jack had gone to find the station commander. The commander had laughed at first. An old fighter pilot who fixed machines in the landing bay was going to tame a dragon that had destroyed 3 professional handlers? It was ridiculous. Insane. Completely against protocol. But Jack had kept standing there, looking at the commander with steady eyes, and something about his calmness must have convinced them. Maybe it was the military bearing he'd never quite managed to shake. Maybe it was the simple fact that he had nothing to lose and everything else had already failed. So here he was, standing in the landing bay, smelling the rust and the sickness and the deep, heavy sadness that hung in the air like fog. The dragon's eye cracked open just slightly when Jack stepped closer. There was no fear in it. There was no hope either. Just a tired acknowledgement that something was happening, and it didn't matter one way or the other. Jack stood there for a long time, not moving, not making any sudden sounds. He just stood in the shadow of the broken beast and let the quiet sit between them. He'd volunteered before logic could stop him. Now he was here and the hard part was about to begin. But he'd never been afraid of hard things. The first week was the hardest because nothing happened at all. Jack came to the bay every morning at the same time. He brought food, not the processed nutrient paste that the other handlers had been forcing down the dragon's throat, but real food. Meat, fresh and raw the way the medical file said dragons preferred it. He'd sit about 10 feet away from the beast, close enough to be present but far enough to give it space. He'd pull out his own lunch and eat slowly, deliberately, making small sounds as he chewed. Not loud enough to startle. Just loud enough to be heard. The dragon didn't move. It barely acknowledged he was there. But Jack kept coming back. On the 3rd day he started talking. Nothing fancy. Just words. He told the dragon about his son, Riley, who was graduating from the academy next month. Riley wanted to be a pilot like his dad had been, and Jack had mixed feelings about that. Pride, sure, but also that tight knot of fear in his chest that came from knowing too much about what could go wrong. He told the dragon how Riley had asked him if he was scared, and Jack had said yes, and Riley had smiled and said, "Good. That means you'll teach me right." The dragon's ear twitched. Maybe it was just a muscle spasm. Jack didn't let himself get excited about it. On the 5th day he told the dragon about his daughter, Casey. She was 15 and having nightmares again. Bad ones. The kind where she woke up screaming and Jack had to hold her until her breathing slowed down. The doctors didn't know what was causing them. Casey wouldn't talk about it. So Jack would sit on the edge of her bed in the dark and just be there. Sometimes he'd tell her stories about when he was young and scared of things. Sometimes he'd just sit in silence. He'd learned that sometimes silence was what people needed most. He told all this to the dragon like the beast was actually listening. Like this massive, broken creature cared about a middle-aged man's problems. The alien supervisors thought he was insane. They'd watch from the observation deck above, their strange elongated faces pressed against the glass. Jack could hear them talking through the intercom system sometimes, discussing whether this human was wasting time, whether they should pull him and try something else. Their previous approaches made sense from a protocol standpoint. Handlers were supposed to establish dominance, use commands, apply medication to calm aggressive behavior, follow the manual. That was how things worked in the Empire. That was how you controlled creatures and people and problems. But everything they tried had made the dragon worse. Jack was doing the exact opposite of what they wanted him to do, and he didn't care. He'd spent enough years following orders that got people killed. He wasn't going to follow a protocol that would kill this beast. On the 10th day something shifted. Jack came in with his lunch, a simple meal of bread and protein he'd synthesized in his quarters. He sat down in his usual spot and started eating. The dragon's head turned slightly, just a few inches, following the sound of his chewing. Jack's heart jumped, but he kept his movements slow and easy. He tore off a piece of the protein and set it on the ground between them. He didn't push it closer. He just left it there and went back to eating his own food. For an hour nothing happened. Jack finished his meal and stayed sitting the way he always did. Then, slowly, so slowly it was almost painful to watch, the dragon's neck extended. Its cracked scales scraped against the metal floor. Its head moved forward, inch by inch, like it was fighting against invisible weight. The dragon's nose touched the food Jack had left. It sniffed once. Then it ate. Jack felt something break open in his chest. It was such a small thing. A dragon eating a piece of protein. But it was the first voluntary action he'd seen from this creature that wasn't about pain or despair. It was something. It was hope wearing a disguise. After that, things moved faster. Not dramatically. This wasn't some magical transformation story where everything suddenly fixed itself. But day by day small changes happened. The dragon started moving more. Its head lifted higher when Jack entered the bay. By the 3rd week, when Jack came in with food, the beast actually watched him approach instead of ignoring him. One afternoon, Jack held out a piece of meat in his palm. He'd done it before, but the dragon had never taken it directly from his hand. Today felt different. Today the dragon leaned its massive head forward and took the food gently, carefully, like it understood that it could hurt Jack and was choosing not to. That night, Jack sat in his small quarters and cried. Just for a few minutes. Just enough to let out some of the weight he'd been carrying. His kids thought he was just a supervisor who fixed machines. The alien administrators thought he was wasting time on a lost cause. But Jack knew better. He was doing something the protocols didn't account for. He was showing the dragon that someone could be trusted. That someone was willing to sit in the dark with broken things and not look away. For the first time in weeks, when the dragon blinked, it did so without fear. The message came through official channels, which meant it wasn't really a request. The Emperor wanted to see the dragon fly. Not just move around the bay or eat from Jack's hand. Fly. With Jack on its back. In a race against the Empire's elite military pilots in their state-of-the-art fighters. And it had to be soon. Within 5 days. Jack read the notice twice, then set it down on his bunk and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He'd known this was coming. You couldn't tame a creature like this without someone eventually demanding proof that you'd actually done something useful. The Emperor didn't care about quiet victories or slow healing. The Emperor cared about results. About power. About having the most impressive dragon in the entire galaxy under his control. This race was going to be the Emperor's way of showing off to the other rulers in the Empire, a demonstration that the broken beast had been fixed and was now stronger than ever. The problem was that Jack wasn't sure the dragon was ready. More than that, Jack wasn't sure if what he'd done could even be measured in the way the Empire wanted to measure it. The training intensified after that notice arrived. Jack worked with the dragon every hour he could steal away from his maintenance duties. He started taking it into the larger sections of the bay, teaching it to move with purpose. He'd learned that the dragon didn't respond well to commands, the way the other handlers had tried to train it. Instead, Jack would move in a direction and the dragon would follow. He'd shift his weight and the beast would shift too. It was like they were learning a language that didn't have words. But flying was different. Flying meant trust on a level that seemed impossible. The night before the race, Jack brought his daughter to see the dragon. He wasn't supposed to. Civilians weren't allowed in the landing bay. But Casey had asked and Jack couldn't say no. She walked slowly around the dragon, studying it the way a scientist might study something under a microscope. The dragon watched her with those intelligent eyes that had come back to life over the past weeks. "Is he scared?" Casey asked. Jack thought about it. "Yeah, probably. Flying's a big deal." "Are you scared?" she pressed. Jack smiled a little. Terrified. Casey reached out and touched the dragon's scaled neck. The beast lowered its head, leaning into her hand like a cat seeking attention. "Then you guys are perfect for each other," she said. "You both know what it's like to be scared and do it anyway." Jack felt his throat tighten. His daughter had a way of cutting straight through to the truth of things. The morning of the race, Jack woke before dawn. He went through his morning routine on autopilot: shower, coffee, the same clothes he always wore. He told Riley he loved him before his son left for school. He made sure Casey had her breakfast. He did all the normal things a father does because he needed to remember that this race was just one day. One moment. The important stuff was the breathing, the living, the people who depended on him. Then he went to the bay to prepare the dragon. The beast was already alert, sensing that something was different about today. Its scales had healed considerably over the weeks. The dull crack marks were fading, replaced by a surface that caught light again. Its eyes were bright. His breathing was strong. When Jack approached, the dragon stood to its full height, wings spreading in a stretch. "Yeah, buddy," Jack said quietly, running his hand along the dragon's neck. "I know. Big day." Jack had never ridden a dragon before. No human had, not successfully. The armor he wore was standard military issue, designed to protect against physical damage and radiation. The harness that connected him to the dragon had been custom-built based on dragon anatomy files. It felt fragile for something that was supposed to keep him alive at supersonic speeds. When Jack climbed onto the dragon's back, the crowd in the observation areas went silent. Hundreds of aliens and humans watching through the reinforced glass. The Emperor himself was there, Jack knew, though he couldn't see him from this angle. Military pilots were suiting up in their sleek fighters. Everything was ready. The starting gates loomed ahead, massive structures that would release all the competitors at the same moment. Jack leaned forward and rested his hand on the dragon's neck. "We're going to do this our way," he whispered. "Not their way. Our way. You understand me?" The dragon's muscles tensed beneath him. The gates opened. What happened next defied every principle of military strategy and aerial combat. The dragon didn't fly like a machine. It moved like thought itself, intuitive and unpredictable, wild in ways the alien pilots' rigid calculations couldn't anticipate. They tried to outmaneuver it, to use their superior technology and programmed responses. But Jack and the dragon were doing something the Empire had never seen before. They were flying like a single organism. Two separate creatures acting with perfect synchronization born from weeks of trust rather than commands. Jack didn't tell the dragon where to go. He just shifted his weight slightly, changed the pressure of his hands, adjusted his breathing. And the dragon understood. It knew what he wanted because it had learned to read him the way he'd learned to read it. They banked left when the fighters expected them to go right. They accelerated when physics suggested they should conserve energy. They moved together, human and beast, intuition and instinct. The military pilots never stood a chance. When the dragon crossed the finish line first, the crowd didn't cheer. They went completely silent. Not the silence of boredom or disappointment, but the silence of people witnessing something they didn't have words for. Something that challenged everything they understood about how the universe was supposed to work. Jack looked down at the dragons below them as the dragon circled back, and he saw something that made his chest feel light. The other dragons, the ones that had been perfectly trained and completely obedient, were watching. Their eyes were tracking Jack's dragon with what looked like something close to hope. He'd done it. Not because the dragon was stronger or faster, but because they understood each other. And in an empire built on control and dominance, that was the most dangerous thing of all. The celebration lasted 3 days. The Emperor threw a feast in Jack's honor. There were speeches about human ingenuity and the power of determination. Politicians who'd never acknowledged Jack's existence suddenly wanted to shake his hand. News feeds across the empire were calling him a hero. A man who'd done the impossible. The broken dragon had been fixed, and humanity had proved itself capable of something the aliens had failed at. Jack hated every second of it. He smiled and nodded and accepted the praise because that was what you were supposed to do. But something felt wrong. He could sense it the way he'd learned to sense things during his military days, a prickling at the back of his neck, a wrongness in the air. People kept congratulating him, but there was something underneath their words. Resentment maybe. Fear. The kind of fear that came from losing power. On the fourth day the dragon wouldn't eat. Jack noticed it immediately when he brought the fresh meat to the bay. The dragon turned its head away. Its scales, which had been regaining their luster, looked dull again. Its breathing was shallow. Jack ran his hand along the beast's neck and felt the heat radiating from its skin. The dragon was burning up from the inside. Medical team to landing bay, Jack said into his communicator, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. Emergency protocol. The response came back cold and clinical. The dragon is stable according to all monitors. No medical team required. Jack's blood went cold. He ran a manual scan himself, using the equipment in the bay's medical station. It was basic stuff, nothing like the sophisticated diagnostics in the main medical center, but it was enough. His hands shook as he read the results. There were toxins in the dragon's bloodstream. Not anything natural. This was deliberate. Someone had poisoned his dragon. Jack grabbed his communication device and tried calling the medical center directly. No answer. He tried the Emperor's office. Transferred between departments until he couldn't get through to anyone. That's when he understood. Someone didn't want this investigated officially. Someone wanted the dragon dead, and they wanted it to happen quietly. Jack looked at the dragon, at those intelligent eyes that were starting to glaze over with pain and confusion, and he made a decision that probably would have gotten him arrested if anyone had known what he was planning. He was going to save this beast himself. The first place he broke into was the biology lab on the second level. Jack had been a military pilot, not a scientist, but he'd learned a few things over the years about how to move through secured areas without being noticed. Years of watching the station's patrol patterns, understanding security rotations, knowing where the cameras had blind spots. He slipped through a maintenance access and into the lab after midnight. The toxin analysis took him 3 hours. He had to work carefully, comparing the dragon's blood samples against every known poison in the Empire's database. His hands moved methodically, even though his mind was racing. Someone had done this on purpose. Someone with access to restricted compounds. Someone with power. By the time he'd identified the toxin, Jack understood the stakes. This wasn't some random sabotage. This was orchestrated. Political. The dragon's victory had threatened someone important enough to take drastic action. The antidote didn't exist in any official database. Jack had to synthesize it from component parts. He stole from 3 different departments over the next 12 hours. A protein synthesizer from the agricultural section. Rare minerals from the geology lab. Enzymes from the biological research center. He moved through the station like a ghost, taking only what he needed, leaving no trail that was obvious enough to trace. He worked in a storage closet for 8 hours, combining ingredients that probably weren't meant to go together, running calculations on an old handheld device from his military days. The process was crude compared to what a real scientist could do, but it worked. The green liquid that formed in his makeshift setup matched his theoretical calculations. It wasn't perfect, but it might be enough. Back in the landing bay, the dragon was barely conscious. Jack didn't hesitate. He found a vein in the dragon's neck, one of the major arteries where the blood flowed fast and strong. His hands were steady as he inserted the hypodermic needle. The antidote was murky and imperfect, but Jack pushed it into the dragon's bloodstream with the same determination he'd used to raise his kids alone, to survive wars, to tame this magnificent creature. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on, buddy. Stay with me. You've got more flying to do. You've got more healing to do. Don't you dare quit on me now." The dragon's body seized. For a moment that stretched forever, nothing happened. Jack felt his hope fracturing. He'd failed. He'd been too late. He'd done everything wrong. Then the dragon gasped. Its body convulsed once, powerfully, and the poison began to purge itself. The beast vomited black fluid onto the metal floor, the toxins leaving its body. Its breathing became deeper, more regular. The glow started returning to its eyes. Jack fell to his knees beside the dragon and let himself shake. When security arrived an hour later, they found Jack sitting against the bay wall, one hand resting on the dragon's neck, both of them breathing. The guards looked confused. Someone had called them, but they weren't sure why. The dragon looked fine. More than fine. It looked better than it had even right after the race. Medical emergency, Jack said, his voice rough. It's handled now. The guards left, uncertain. But Jack knew this wasn't over. Someone had tried to kill the dragon. Someone powerful. And they'd failed. Which meant they'd probably try again. He'd have to be ready. He'd survived worse odds before. He'd survived these two. The investigation into the poisoning went nowhere official. The Emperor's office launched an inquiry, but Jack knew before it even started that they wouldn't find anything. Whoever had ordered the attack had covered their tracks too well. Too much power, too much influence. Instead, Jack received a formal invitation to the Imperial Palace. The Emperor wanted to meet him in person. Jack wore his dress uniform for the first time in years. It felt tight across the shoulders, like it belonged to a different version of himself. Riley helped him with the collar before he left, his son's hands steady and careful. Casey hugged him for a long time without saying anything. She didn't need to. She understood that this meeting mattered in ways that went beyond words. The Emperor was smaller than Jack expected. Not physically, the alien was tall, with the elongated frame typical of his species. But there was something diminished about him nonetheless. Maybe it was the way he held himself, or maybe it was just that Jack had stopped being impressed by titles and rank a long time ago. You saved something valuable, the Emperor said without preamble. His translator rendered the words in perfectly accented English. The dragon would have died without your intervention. The Empire loses a powerful asset. And yet you did this knowing full well that you might be discovered, that you might face severe consequences. Jack stood at attention. Yes, sir. Why? The Emperor genuinely seemed to want to know. Jack thought about how to answer. How to explain that some things mattered more than protocol. More than safety. More than personal consequence. He thought about his kids, about his soldiers, about every time he'd had to choose between what was easy and what was right. Because he was alive, Jack said. And someone needed to fight to keep him that way. That's reason enough. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, an expression that looked strange on his alien features. The Empire needs more humans like you. I'm offering you a position. Admiral of the Dragon Corps. Command over all aerial defense operations. Title, rank, authority. Everything you've earned. Jack's first instinct was to say yes. To accept the offer and secure his family's future, to gain the kind of power that could protect them from whatever conspiracy had tried to kill the dragon. Would have been the smart move. I'm going to refuse, Jack said instead. The Emperor's expression froze. Around them, guards shifted uncomfortably. People didn't refuse the Emperor. Jack was probably about to learn that lesson in a very painful way. Hear me out, Jack continued, because he'd already crossed the line. The dragon didn't need a military commander. It needed someone who cared about it as a living being. That's what worked. That's what the Empire's missing. Not more power structures. Not more control. You need a place where broken things can actually heal. He talked for the next hour. About what he'd learned from taming the dragon. About how the other creatures the Empire had tried to control through dominance had all failed. About how there might be something better than the systems that had been in place for thousands of years. A sanctuary. A refuge. A place where injured creatures, alien and human both, could recover without fear of being destroyed if they didn't immediately prove their usefulness. The Emperor listened. Jack couldn't tell if he was actually hearing the words or just being polite. But when Jack finished, the Emperor did something unexpected. He approved the plan. 6 months later, the sanctuary opened on the outer edge of the station. It started small. Just a few buildings, some medical equipment that Jack had to practically beg from the main departments, and a staff of people who thought Jack was either a genius or completely insane. His daughter Casey worked there as an assistant, learning biology and medicine in a way no classroom could have taught her. Riley came on weekends, helping repair equipment and learning that strength could be about healing as much as it could be about fighting. The first residents were creatures that the Empire had given up on. A dragon with neurological damage. 3 aliens from a species the Empire considered too unpredictable to work with. A human soldier who'd been dismissed from service because his injuries made him unable to fight anymore. Broken things. Forgotten things. Discarded things. Jack taught them all the same way he taught the first dragon. With patience. With presence. With the stubborn refusal to give up on them. Then something unexpected happened. Other humans started arriving at the station. Pilots, engineers, medics, scientists. People from across human space who'd heard about what Jack was doing. They came asking if they could work at the sanctuary. They came because they understood something fundamental, that there was a different way to live. A different way to contribute to the galaxy. Not through domination. Through compassion. A year after the sanctuary opened, Jack was sitting in his office when Riley brought someone to meet him. A human woman named Devon, a former military medic who'd read about the sanctuary and traveled 3 systems to get here. "I want to help," Devon said simply. "I'm tired of a universe that only values things when they're useful. I want to be part of something that values things for what they are." Jack hired her on the spot. The sanctuary grew. Slowly at first, then faster. Other species started sending their broken ones, their abandoned ones, their forgotten ones. Because word spread through the galaxy in the way that important truths always do. There was a place where you didn't have to be perfect. A place where healing mattered as much as productivity. A place where a human and a dragon could teach each other that strength wasn't about dominance. It was about the courage to love something broken and refuse to let it die. 5 years later, when Riley graduated from the academy, he didn't become a military pilot like his father had been. He became a sanctuary medic. Casey studied animal biology and now ran the entire medical operations for 3 different facilities they'd opened on other stations. Jack didn't have to tell them what mattered. They'd learned it by living it. The Emperor never visited the sanctuary. But sometimes his administration made quiet donations. Sometimes they diverted resources Jack's way without asking too many questions. Jack understood. The Emperor was a political being. He operated in the world of power and control. But maybe, in some small way, Jack's refusal to accept that world as the only option had changed something. Maybe even the most powerful rulers in the galaxy could be touched by the idea that there were better ways to live. Decades passed. Jack grew older. His hair turned gray. His hands got wrinkled. But every morning he still walked to the sanctuary to work. To sit with the broken things and help them heal. To show them that they hadn't been abandoned. That someone cared enough to stay. The first dragon, the broken one that had started everything, lived for 60 more years. It became the symbol of the sanctuary. Creatures came from across the galaxy to see it, to understand that redemption was possible. That healing was possible. That even the most broken things could find their way back to wholeness. And slowly, quietly, one act of compassion at a time, the galaxy changed. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen through force or law or imperial decree. It happened because one human refused to accept that broken things should be destroyed. Because he chose presence over power. Because he understood that the greatest strength of humanity wasn't our weapons or our ambition. It was our capacity to care about something beyond ourselves. To fight for something just because it mattered. To keep showing up, day after day, for creatures and people the universe had written off. That was Jack's legacy. Not a title. Not power. But a sanctuary where broken things learned that they were worth saving. And that changed everything.